Hello, I'm Rick Hertless, founder of His Gospel Power. Thank you for joining with our program as we look into the book of Daniel, and we are in the book of Daniel, chapter 8. So we're moving right along in this book, and we're looking at the book, we're coming at all of these prophecy books, is how we are to live for Christ in these last days. Now, yes, we're looking at it because we want to be prepared, we want to know what's going on and all those things, but really, the prophecy books are not so that we can read our horoscope, okay? It's not so that we can plan whether or not we should buy that mansion or whatever. It's not so we can know our long-term, realize our long-term dreams or know if we should, start building the house or just wait till Jesus comes. Because number one, we don't even know when Jesus is coming back, although we've discussed many times on this program, I believe it will be soon. I believe for sure within the next 10 years. However, that being said, this is not so we can say, put off whatever it is that you think you're supposed to do. Now, should you put off the 3-story mansion? Yes, you should. I mean, I personally, that's just a whole nother deal right there. This is not a name and a claim it program. I believe God answers your needs, gives you, and tells you what you need, and the rest, the money, he has given you money. If you can afford a 3-story mansion, then he has given you money to help the kingdom. That's why he's very specific about that in the rich in this world, he has given them money so that they can help the kingdom. So, if you're buying mansions and all of that kind of thing, well, I hope you're, especially if you're giving 20, 30, 50% back to God, and he still allows you to get a mansion, you still got enough money to do that, then you know what? It's probably God saying he's giving you those blessings. So he's giving you those blessings to let you know that, hey, I approve of what you're doing. That's fine. But if you are seeking God only to get those blessings, then you are seeking the wrong thing. You're not seeking God at all. You're seeking your flesh. And so, all of those things is why we look at prophecy not so that you can know how to get rich or anything of that sort. We look at prophecy so that we understand how we are to glorify Christ in these last days. How are we to live for him? And that's what, as we look into prophecy books, I believe that's what it explains to us. Especially, we mentioned in the beginning that we're looking at the book of Daniel for the character of Daniel, how you live for God in good and in plenty, and then of course the character of God. The character of God is he can be trusted. He is faithful, and so those aspects is what we are looking at prophecy for. In fact, that's really the Old Testament and the New to a degree, but the Old Testament for certain is so that you can understand the character of God and that he can be trusted. He was always faithful. He said that he will, he will bless those who bless him and curse those who curse him. That's the bottom line. That's kind of how that worked. If you are obedient to Christ, then you can expect to be led by God, and he will help you to wade through this life. Now, that does not mean that you will have the perfect life and everything's just wonderful and you got riches and you got cars and you got houses and all that. That's not what I'm saying. I am saying that when life happens, you will know exactly how you are to handle those things. So we are looking at the book of Daniel. Before we get into that, I do want to remind you, please go to hisgospelpower.org, click on the donate button or the contact us button. Also, there's a new aspect of the website that I've put on there now. It's the download section. You can get some of my songs, some of my books from that section if you would like to. I mean, they are cheap. It's not, you are not going to have to break the bank. They're 99 cents for a book. And I wrote those books so that they might be read. I didn't put them in there for $7, $8, $10. They're downloadable and they're 99 cents. And so please, if you would like to learn a little bit more about different topics, go and take a look at the website at the download section, and the books are 99 cents. The songs are 99 cents as well. Just about everything is, unless you want an album. If you want a whole album of songs, it's a little more. But for the most part, you can see I'm not really trying to get rich. I'm trying to hopefully help give you some more education, and then, of course, help support this ministry along the way. So we are in the book of Daniel. We're in chapter 8, and we are now in verse 1. And it says, it says, in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, we know that King Belshazzar was Nebuchadnezzar's son, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the one appeared to me the first time. I saw in the vision, and it so happened while I was working that I was in Shushan, the citadel, which is in the province of Elam, and I saw the vision that I was by the River Ulai. Then I lifted my eyes, and I saw, and there standing beside the river was a ram which had 2 horns. The 2 horns were high, but the one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram pushing westward. I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, and southward, so that no animal could withstand him, nor was there any that could deliver from his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. All right, so now we're getting another look of the end days. We're getting another look at the Antichrist here. The horns always represent some sort of power, and usually a kingdom or an individual and some sort of power. And so we're looking at 2 horns of the ram, but one horn was higher than the other. And so that's what we're looking at here, I think, once again, as we look at this. And it says the ram was pushing westward, northward, and southward, which means it's coming out of the east, which really, now we may get into Ezekiel eventually. We may get into that study. Really, that could be talking about Russia, China, and Turkey. It could be talking about that, where they all join together, and then they are actually going to be pushing northward, southward, and westward. That's speculation, except, it looks like in the Word, those 3 countries will come together in the last days, maybe to form the war for the War of Armageddon, or at least the war against the saints. Ron Stewart.
Yeah.
Stoidle, sorry. Ron It's been so long I can't remember your name.
Yeah, we've known each other for more than a day. Yeah, this is really interesting that there is so much controversy outside of the Christian world about Daniel's visions. They will claim that these visions were written after all these events took place. We know these are historical events. Today, 2,000 years, or actually it's 2,500 years later, we know the truth of what really happened in this.
Exactly, yeah, because this was about, Daniel, remember, was written approximately 539, 540, something. So, yes.
2,500 years ago.
Years, right.
But this was still hundreds of years before these events actually happened.
Yes.
This, and people need to remember, this was still during the Babylonian Empire. This was still during the first portion of every one of Daniel's dreams, the first beast, the first head. These were all, he had no clue in the human mind of what was going to happen. So to look back at it now, where he's getting these prophecies of what would happen, we're going to explain what this means. He was still living in the first kingdom of his dreams. So he had no clue of what was going to happen. So he's getting these dreams about a ram with 2 horns, and then a goat, and a human body that has all these different portions. He hasn't seen any of this yet. So for those to say, well, it must have been written hundreds of years later, well, we as Christians know that if you believe the entire Bible is inspired by God and is accurate, then you have to accept the fact that this was written before these things ever happened. And looking back now, we see exactly how it played out verbatim, like Daniel saw in his dreams.
Well, and this actually is this is Alexander the Great. This particular prophecy, it looks like it's at least the near portion of the prophecy was Alexander the Great.
Well, yeah, when we get into the goat portion of it.
The far portion, of course, we've yet to see, and I believe it has something to do with the Antichrist. It has maybe to do with the false prophet, the other countries that are going to try to invade and destroy Israel. But this, once we look at this, especially once we get into verse 5, it really points to Alexander the Great almost perfectly.
Right.
And so we will see that, like I said, this is at least the near part of this prophecy. Now, why would that be? Well, for one, it tells us two things. Those who were living on the earth at that time, it shows them the power of God and that He can be trusted. And those who now read the Word and can look back on history and see that this was actually before Alexander the Great, we can say this was the power of God again, because He could see things and we can trust Him. That's what all of this is about.
Well, and even if you want to look at it, we look at modern politics today, and you can see the rise and the fall of certain powers, and you can kind of see where some transitions are going. So even if you want to accept the fact that Daniel may have seen an up-and-coming Medo-Persian empire here with the ram,
or the Greco empire, of course, we're also talking about. But yeah,
right.
But you're right, because you got one horn that's big and one horn that's little, which is probably the Medo-Persians.
Right.
And
yeah.
then the Greeks are going to come and destroy that.
Right. So he may have possibly seen, he may have been into politics. He may have seen that the Medo-Persians were coming to power, but he could not have seen Alexander years and years down the road of what he did.
Right.
So to say, well, maybe he just saw the tides turning. Yeah, you can't see the tides turning multiple governments and kingdoms down the road.
And I'll give you a good example. Kim Clement. In 2014, now see, you've heard several quote-unquote prophets talking about, one in particular, I'm not going to mention his name because I'm not trying to discredit him. So far he's been okay, so I've been watching this guy. But anyway, he was giving prophecy about Trump, that Trump was going to be president. Well, but he was giving the prophecy about Trump being president about the time that Trump started winning the Republican ticket and all of those things. So that's not that far of a stretch. Now, it is a stretch if you're a prophet and you miss it, because if you're a prophet, you cannot miss one prophecy. But this man, Kim Clement, I think they call him Kim Clement.
I think so.
In 2014, he prophesied Trump would be president. And not only that, after he prophesied that, he said, they will say impeach, but they will not be successful. They cannot impeach. Now, this was in 2014. Trump wasn't even a blip on the radar. He was not. I don't think he may have been thinking about running back then in 2014, but it wasn't common public knowledge. And for the fact of him, this man saying in 2014 Trump was going to be president, then he was going to be impeached, and of course, then it was not going to be fulfilled. And Kim Clement, you can't say, oh well, he could have just put that and backdated it, months ago or something. No, he couldn't, because he's been dead now for about 2 years. So, and why did he die? Well, maybe that's one reason, so that it's because of that. You can't say, well, you can do a lot of things with the computer. Maybe he could have hacked it back or whatever. But he can't do that because he died. So those prophecies that we are seeing, just like you're saying, those prophets that are seeing what's going on right now and then kind of giving maybe and they might be, and they could, I'm not saying they're not prophets. I'm just saying Daniel, like you said, seeing the Medo-Persians, may not been such a big stretch.
Right.
But to Alexander the Great, oh my, we're totally different territory.
Well, and we can just look at something as simple as, well, it's not really that simple, but in verse 3, where it talks about he says, it had 2 horns, both horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. Now, we know historically now that the Persian Empire was more powerful than the Medo.
Right, the Medes. Right.
The Medes.
But the Medes came up first.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So to be able, and the most interesting part is, and I'm going to jump ahead here, verse 20 says exactly who these horns were.
Right.
So it's not like Daniel's just saying these 2 empires will come up. He goes in later in the same chapter and says this is who these 2 are. You know, we
well, and then he also tells in this very next verse who the next one's talking about, which is Greece.
Right. So that would be different. That would be like us saying, "Oh yeah, in this next election, a man's going to win the election and he's going to have blonde hair."
Right. Well, you know, and that there is some of those so-called prophets that do that kind of thing.
Right. So
be very careful of that.
Right. So Daniel telling about the 2 empires, that they weren't equal powers, that one was more powerful than the other, but that the more powerful one came up after the weaker one. I mean, that you're talking about, that's getting details.
Yes.
And then later on saying, oh yeah, and by the way, this is what they're 2.
This is what they are.
This is what the 2 kingdoms are.
This is what it represents.
Right.
So when you look at that, you begin to understand this is truly God giving this prophecy. Especially since now he's actually naming the Medes and the Persians and the Greeks.
Right.
And of course, so now it changes all things. It changes the whole outlook of what this scripture is telling. And the biggest thing is for us who are reading it today is to know that God is faithful. Now, like I said, the far part of this prophecy might possibly be China, Russia, Turkey, possibly. We don't know that. But at least the close part of it we do know, because it not only has happened, but he told us who it was going to be. So we've seen that. Well, that's about all the time that we've got for today. Thank you so much for joining with our program as we look into the book of Daniel, chapter 8, and as we see things unfolding in our world that we have never seen before, with biblical proportions of locusts and of fires and of hail and of wind, the jet stream now. I mean, it was Mike from around the world said that we're going to start seeing a jet stream that may be up to 200 miles per hour. He told us that a couple of months ago. I listened to him fairly regularly, and sure enough, now I just saw on the news that the jet stream and what they're experiencing in the UK was a jet stream of 160 to 200 miles per hour. So that's incredible that all of that is beginning to unfold right before our very eyes. We are in the last days. Please go to hisgospelpower.org, click on the donate button or the contact us button, and don't forget to also go to the downloads and look at the books. There might be some in there that might help you, you might like to read. Until next time, I pray you receive His gospel power today.
He died for you. He died for me. From our sin, He set us free. He loved us so, His life He gave. So if we ask, we can be saved. He's calling you, He's calling you. Jesus Christ is calling. Touched your heart and soul. with me, and we will pray that all your sin be washed away. Don't be afraid, don't be ashamed. Just come and praise His holy name. He's calling you, He's calling you. Jesus Christ is calling you. If He's touched your heart and soul, then come let Jesus make you whole. If you feel Him touching you, confess your sin.